Thank you. Right back at you. Just 1 week in.
You say 1 weekend?
Yeah, 1 week into the new year.
Oh, 1 week into the new year. Okay, I missed
Yeah,
that.
I've lost my ability to enunciate in 2025 because of, I think it's because of the president-elect, but we'll get to that. So sorry.
All right,
Was that inappropriate? I'm sorry.
not to me. Some of our listeners may find it, but not to me. So, what's your spiritual energy number? So, no,
I'm at a 10. I don't have to. I don't have to choose it today. I'm really there. So I'm not like overriding a lower spiritual energy. I'm really there with a 10 today. So I hope I don't lose my voice because I tend to speak too much when I'm really at that 10.
no. Well, I'm a 10 as well. I have to choose a 10. I got some challenges in my life. It's testing the ability to be a 10. But like I said, I find it's in those moments where being a 10 is really what's important. So I'm a 10 as well. Um, Grateful I go into my gratitude moment. I'm grateful for a new year, to be alive to be in a new year. And grateful for my mother to be alive in a new year as well. She has her health challenges and other things going on in their lives, family lives. But still grateful for the energy to be experiencing her love energy still. Grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Again, 24 hours to be alive. The older you get, I realize the more grateful you are, at least you should be. Because you don't realize how, or you start to realize how things can change quickly with age. Grateful for stable internet. Been having some trouble technically the last couple of days. So today, so far, I have stable internet. So I'm grateful for that. Grateful for the opportunity for you to be alive and be well and be present. So have a conversation with you. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for, all the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm, sitting here. We've been below freezing for over a week. We haven't, gone above that. Haven't even approached 32 for a few days now, and I'm just grateful to be living in a structure where I have heat when I need it, which is not true for a lot of people on the planet. Grateful for whatever problems I might have at any given moment in my life, that I'm sitting in a relatively safe place. I think of my sisters and brothers in Ukraine and Gaza, and right now in parts of the greater Los Angeles area where lots of people are leaving their homes because of some pretty nasty is not even the right word, horrendous, tragic fires out there. And so just grateful for having my basic needs met: indoor plumbing, a refrigerator with food in it, and the ability to get up every day and do things that are important to me, and which I hope are, as I intend them to be, of service to others. So just grateful for all of that, and as to echo you, reasonably good health, and as far as I can tell, a reasonably stable and sane mind. So we'll find out more about that as we speak today, but we'll see.
Well, that's great. Great to hear. So why don't you walk us into what our topic for today will be?
Yeah. So because it's the first podcast of the new year, I'm just going to briefly provide the overview. We've been having these conversations for we're well into our third year. We haven't completed 3 yet, but we're approaching our 3-year anniversary. And we've been having conversations based on my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, which is subtitled The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And we speak about the issues and the traits and the elements in 248 years of American history that many of us choose to deny or make believe aren't true. And so with that today, and there's a lot going on today with the president-elect will be sworn in on January 20th. The official certification of the election took place on Monday, on January 6th, much less tumultuous than on January 6, 2021, when the current president-elect incited a riot and an insurrection at the Capitol trying to overturn the election results. So we're going to put that stuff on the back burner. We'll have plenty of time to get to that. But today we're going to honor, in this bigger picture of the American narrative and the many narratives that make up that American narrative, the passing of our 39th president, Jimmy Carter, James Earl Carter Jr., who's actually, at rest in the Capitol today, and we'll have the official state funeral tomorrow, and he'll be laid to rest. I forget if he's going to be laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery or back in Georgia, where he's from. I'm not really clear on that. But just to speak a little bit about him, who, because of his uniqueness as a president, and I guess every president is unique in his own way. One of the few times in my speaking about anything where I don't say his or her own way, because we've yet to have a female president in this country, but especially unique in what he did after his presidency. So I just want to that's what we're going to do. And I have some specific things we'll focus on, but I'll stop there so you can respond to that choice. And I'm just thinking about what you said before we went live. You kind of joked. I didn't realize you were joking about, you thought we were going to speak about another president. I won't say that for now. I won't mention that name for now, though it might come up. So I pass the baton of speaking about James Earl Carter Jr. to you.
All right. Well, again, I think it's a wonderful topic. All the people that we talked about, and I think I may have mentioned Jimmy Carter as one of the people that we honored in the show. Not sure if I did. I think I did. I should have. Sure. But, I think he epitomizes being fully human, and everything that he was. And I think that's why he was so attacked, politically in the media. I mean, you would think Jimmy Carter, from the way the media always portrayed him when he was alive, was the worst president we had. You know what I'm saying? Just because of coming through the 70s and with the high inflation and those things. But you look at him as a man, and you look at his policies, and you look at some of the things he even did before he even became president. I did some research on Jimmy Carter and was just really astounded. I didn't even know this until today, that, even when he was governor, he was notably, progressive for his time. He actually declared a time for racial discrimination is over. That's governor in Georgia. And he added portraits of prominent Black Georgians to the state capitol. I mean, so he was really being progressive and, I hate to use the term woke, because of all the negative terminology the right has been able to assign to it, that is actually now an insult to call somebody woke in national media. But to me, again, woke, using the definition of someone who is aware, the true definition of woke, being conscious, being aware of your surroundings, and have an understanding of what his role is as a human being. That definition of woke, he definitely fit that as well. I mean, I don't think any president that I heard of was as progressive as he was when it came to policies on racial issues, racial equity issues, as well as environmental issues. He was a staunch environmental advocate. And then, of course, the work he was doing, we get more into that throughout the show, but the work he's done, post his presidency with Habitat for Humanity, traveling over to Cuba, just he never stopped being a humanitarian and showed really with having achieved being a president as a milestone, but growing even from there, which is incredible that, you know, he's someone that we should be holding up as example for as what a president means and what it means to be uh, head of state, as we call that title. So that's why I just want to add that to our discussion. That's someone who I truly admired, have always admired, and unfortunately, him passing, he lived to be 100. I'm pleased that he's at peace now, but just a great man and a great human being, and I think that he's someone that we all can look at and learn from, particularly in these times right now when you got one president who wants to just change names of historical bodies of water. So, but that's my take on Jimmy Carter. Great man, truly the epitome of being a Philly.
Yeah. So thanks for that. So what I want to do is just bullet point several things from his presidency. And then at some point, I want to refer to his, I think it was July 1979 speech, which was called the Crisis of Confidence speech. And I remember that. And I was in my mid-20s in 1979. It was after we had gas lines and the price of gas went up. It doesn't sound funny to say, but the price of gas went up to like $1 a gallon, and everybody was panicking. When I was in high school, I mean, gas, when I first could drive a car, gas was between 31 and 33 cents a gallon. So it's like it went to $1, it tripled. Everybody was, panicking. But more seriously, just a couple of bullet points from his presidency. I have to just look over so I make sure I get these right. So he was president from 1977 through 1981. Again, elected in November of 76. In his 4 years, he appointed more Black Americans to the federal bench. In other words, more federal judges who were African American than the total of every president before him. So, I mean, obviously, you go back to Washington and that wasn't going to happen because the blacks were slaves. But if you counted all of the appointees of Black judges to the federal bench, in his 4 years, Jimmy Carter appointed more than the combined total of all the presidents before him. So that's, going backwards, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Johnson, Kennedy, Eisenhower, Truman, keep on going. And that just speaks reams about American history because the Civil Rights Act was only passed in 1964, 12 years before Carter became president. So that's one. In that same 4-year period, he appointed 5 times as many women to federal judgeships as any of the former presidents did. And in the wake of the Watergate scandal, which was Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal in the early 1970s, he passed ethical legislation from the White House to help rebuild America's faith in government. He saw the lack of faith in government. So he did all those things. He also was responsible for bringing Israel and Egypt together. They had been at war multiple times in the years before his presidency and performed what many thought was an impossible task through what is now known as the Camp David Accords, where he got the two countries to come together and sign peace treaty. He was, as you said, very progressive and forward-thinking in his presidency. He established the Department of Energy, knowing how important it was for the country to become more energy independent and to move toward more alternatives to fossil fuels. He wasn't against fossil fuels or coal. So he had some positions that many conservatives would agree with, but he saw the need to become energy independent and to get other sources of energy as a country. He founded and established the Department of Education. All right. And he also, there's one more I'm missing here that I just go. And he also established FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, which has saved and helped subsidize hundreds of thousands of millions of lives and people's livelihoods after natural and human-made disasters. So those are just a few of his in-presidency accomplishments. Many people think of him as the guy who failed to get the hostages out of Iran and under whose watch they were taken. And because one helicopter crashed in an attempt, a failed rescue attempt. But in fact, the hostages were freed on the last day of his presidency, which was January 6th, January 20th, 1981. So all of his negotiations to get them out actually did succeed. But because of some shenanigans with the incoming Reagan administration, the hostages weren't freed until, depending on how you want to look at it, the last day of Carter's administration or the first day of Reagan's. So that's just a really quick bullet point over his 4 years. And then, after you riff on that for a bit, we'll take a close look at what his critics call his malaise speech in what was known as the crisis of conscience speech, which was his call to American citizens to take the country back, look at how they're living, help us become energy independent, and do some, sacrifice some blood, sweat, and tears to make us an independent country so we can get back to thriving as the greatest country in the world. And for that, he was criticized. So that's just a quick overview of Jimmy Carter's presidency, and we'll get to his post-presidency work in some detail too.
Yeah, I mean, just listen to some of the things you said and done, like learning that he created the Department of Energy and Education. It's like, I never knew that, so it's like, that's not even talked about. But that's where those departments came from. We just hear about how one man wants to get rid of them right now. Yeah. And, and you look at the stark, it's really a stark contrast of how, these men govern and how these men behave. One man wants to create, be progressive, bring change, humanity to the world. Another man wants to be selfish, narcissistic, bring pain and fear and take from the world. And yet and still he's lauded as where most people right now lift him up and honor him. He gets to dominate news cycles. And another man who has done all the great things that Jimmy Carter has done and stood for only gets mentioned because of the fact that he just really recently passed. But had that not been the case, he would not even be in the news cycle much at all. And just looking at the fact that this man stood on such, I would say, strong moral character is just really incredible. And I just want to continue to talk about some of the things that I did not learn until, our prompting us for our discussion today. And just looking at some of the things he's did again. I'm going to highlight a lot of the racial things he's done because that to me is just really, first of all, interesting in the context that I didn't realize he had done those things. Secondly, I'm not used to, or I can't think of any other president I've heard do any of these things similar, So that's just really just amazing. And how it's never even talked about, let alone in regular media, but just even in Black history, it's not even mentioned, which is a crime. Like, for example, he launched a Black College Initiative to support historical Black colleges and universities. He increased the Department of Education budget, as you laid out. He created the Department of Education, but he increased their budget to HBCUs by over 40%. He talked about he appointed Black judges to the bench, which I think is just, again, phenomenal that he stood on those things. And then just looking at the fact, even when he, again, jumping back when he was governor, but I think it's still impressive, he increased Black appointees on state boards and agencies from 3 prior to him being there to 53, while he was in office. That's just astounding. I don't know any other figure that I've heard of, governor or president, Black or white, male or female, who has had that kind of racial equity track record and just showing how it doesn't even get discussed at all. It's like that's just a bleep or forgotten from his discussion. So that just to me is phenomenal.
Yeah. It's such a shame that, we do this when people die. And it's not just Jimmy Carter or public figures, but, we wait to do eulogies. We should do eulogies, when someone's still alive. It's just, maybe don't call them eulogies, but have celebrations of life while someone's still alive. So, I listened, I watched live the ceremony at the Capitol yesterday, and I heard each of the current and incoming leaders delivered brief eulogies, except for President Biden, because he wasn't in attendance. Vice President Harris was there, but it was Hakeem Jeffries spoke, Mike Johnson spoke, what's his name, Thune, I forget his first name, the new Senate Majority Leader, might be John Thune. Chuck Schumer spoke, and then Kamala Harris delivered the last of those brief eulogies. She did a great job too. I mean, she's having a really interesting week because she had to swear in. She had to certify. I always want to. This is tying back into Jimmy Carter, but I want to give her kudos. First of all, she had to certify the election that she lost. And some of the Republican members in Congress didn't behave really well once she's, did some things they didn't have to do with her up there as the president of the Senate, which is the vice president always is. And then she had to swear in all of the newly elected or reelected senators and congressmen and women. And at least one of the spouse of a white Republican, I think she was a senator, I forget which state. She swore the woman in, shook her hand. The woman's husband was holding the Bible for her. And then once he put the Bible down, Kamala Harris extended her hand to him, and he refused to shake it and just walked away. And she just smiled and stepped aside so he could walk away. But just, so anyway, she delivered this eulogy, and one of the sentences she said was this towards the end. And if this wasn't deliberately written as a contrast to Donald Trump, I don't know what was. But she never mentioned, she didn't do any of that kind of shenanigan stuff. She honored Jimmy Carter. But she said, Jimmy Carter was an all too rare example of a gifted man who also walks with humility, modesty, and grace. So a gifted man who also walks with humility, modesty, and grace. And then she gave two examples. During his presidential campaign, when he was, in the bus going around the country, he often slept in the homes of his supporters rather than in a hotel. He had meals with them and at the table listened to their concerns. Now, I don't know anybody, even though the rest of the presidents I voted for that I admire, I don't know, I never heard anybody doing that. And then he continued that in the first trip he did with his wife, Rosalind. The first trip they did together with Habitat for Humanity, where they were going to go, he didn't just go along and wave. He wore a two-bolt and banged nails and sawed wood. But he rode the bus with the other volunteers. It wasn't like they had a presidential detail and a black limousine behind what was typically a school bus. But when they stopped where they were going to sleep at a local church, the Carters gave up their private room to a couple who had postponed their honeymoon, recently married couple, gave this honeymoon couple their private room and went down and slept in the church basement with the other volunteers. So, I mean, this just, his history is filled with anecdotes like that. He was this fully human being who when the folks at Habitat for Humanity said, he said, well, how can I help you? And they basically said, well, let us use your name and your image. He said, yeah, whatever you want to do. Just, so it's just this generosity of spirit, which is what we want, what I want, from anybody who chooses a life of service. And if you run for public office in this country, whether you understand it or not, you're choosing to serve the American public. And Carter just, relentlessly, in office and out of office, embodied that life of service. So, with as Kamala Harris said, he walked with humility, modesty, and grace while he had to govern and do difficult things as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I say, you got to really question how society really looks at who they lift up as role models. I mean, as we're citing all these great things that Jimmy Carter did, I guarantee I could talk to 20 people today randomly. They just randomly run 20 people at various ages, demographics. I bet 99% won't know half of 10%. They may know, okay, I might get, I know he created the Department of Education and Energy, depending on the age. So somebody who may be a certain age, the baby boomer might know that. But a lot of other things I don't think they would know. Because it doesn't get talked about in our regular culture, And to me, it's intentionally not talked about. Like they don't want to highlight and lift up a person who's done these humanitarian type of activities, because then people can see that there is some benefit to living that kind of lifestyle and have that kind of thinking that brings joy and fulfillment to you if you're living on that path. If you're operating at the frequency, at that level. And it really kind of, the more I think about it, it's kind of upsetting to think that how that is blatantly there. And you got folks who want to go around and talk about removing books from schools and restricting what books can be in schools, and just thinking the mentality that these people are put in a position of leadership is not so much a surprise that people still have those kind of thoughts, but the fact that they're put in leadership and consistently reelected. So it's not just once when people are shocked, but they're consistently put in leadership, having those type of thoughts is really shows you where we are in the world. And some folks still think that because we made some progress in certain areas, that our laws, our policies are still structured from a inequity perspective. And that to me is the alarming thing. I think that Jimmy Carter's death really brings that to the forefront, at least for me, of how society operates. And like I said, just, I keep mentioning the current president as in the newly elected one, in contrast, only because it's such a contrast. Yeah. It's almost summarizing one to say, here's a great man, and here's the behaviors and the things he's done, and it's like, to be that great man, you talked about someone that if you met him, you would not feel as though he would have that elitist attitude that I'm a former governor, former president, head of state, world leader. I've negotiated the Camp David Accord. You just saw a human being that would actually be present, would actually listen to you and make you feel seen and heard. And I know most people that you talk to don't understand what it means to have a person feel seen and heard. They might be physically present in someone's face, but 9 times out of 10, they're not listening to what the person is saying. If you say, what's the average attention span of 18, 19 seconds, when you switch into more about ego takes over, and you think about what more did I need to do. And for him to be at his level of achievement and accomplishment and still be able to be present and be able to sit here and make a person feel seen and heard, that to me is a lesson that we are looking at in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I loved what you just did there, and really, you know, just aside from big or small accomplishments during or after his presidency, just who he was as a human being, and what we honor and don't honor in this country. If we can, if we look at who gets elected and who doesn't, and where we put our attention, um, we kind of, you and I kind of know this, but we tend not to value things that are really important and lasting. And we, to use the cliched language, we are most interested in the biggest noise or the shiniest objects, and we really don't zero in on what's, first of all, what's true and what's important. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to send you a link. I don't know if we can share that or not with folks listening. It's a link to both the transcript and the audio of Jimmy Carter's July 15th Crisis of Confidence speech. And I'm just going to speak a little bit about that, and then we can riff on it. So one of the things he did leading up to this speech was he invited ordinary people, Americans, to Camp David. Not anybody wanted to come, but they were, in his own words, various segments of society, from business and labor, teachers and preachers, governors, mayors, private citizens. And then when he left, he just spoke to people whenever he had a chance, and he asked them what was on their minds and what advice they would give him. And he quoted some of them during the speech. I'm just going to read a couple of the things that he quoted, because first, that he would do this at all and then say it out loud was impressive. But it gives a sense of where Americans were back in 1979. So a Southern governor said to him, "Mr. President, you are not leading this nation. You are just managing the government." And somebody else said, "Some of your cabinet members don't seem loyal. There is not enough discipline among your disciples." Somebody else said, "Mr. President, we're in trouble. Talk to us about blood and sweat and tears." Somebody else said, "If you lead, Mr. President, we will follow." From a young Chicano man, quote, "Some of us have suffered recession all our lives." Someone else said, "Some people have wasted energy, but others haven't had anything to waste." And I know there are more. I could go on and on. There are quite a few of them in here. And what he did then was go on and speak to the apparent lack of confidence that Americans, oh, cool. Thank you for that. I was actually looking at my own copy, so I didn't see that. And he spoke about the need for Americans to make some sacrifices in order to work toward energy independence, which was something that the fossil fuel industry wanted to hear. Buy less from the Middle Eastern countries and use more of our own fuel here. That didn't make a lot of the real progressive people happy, by the way. But he spoke about driving at the speed limit to save gasoline, to organizing the number of trips you have to make with your car, to carpooling. He spoke of all different ways we could sacrifice our habitual behaviors in order to, in every household, use less energy. And he made a lot of suggestions. And he was then just hammered by the press, obviously by his political opponents, and really attacked by his opponent for the presidency. Again, this was 1979, and there would be a new election in 1980. And his opponent, his primary opponent, Ronald Reagan, became a cheerleader for America, just saying, we're great, we're in great shape, we can overcome anything, we da 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 da. And he just kind of whitewashed all the problems that Jimmy Carter pointed to. They were real problems, and real people were suffering. So many people, in retrospect, nowadays, looking at history through the Carter administration and the two Reagan administrations, realize that in many ways, Jimmy Carter got punished for telling the truth, punished in terms of losing the presidency to Ronald Reagan, and that Ronald Reagan got rewarded for making believe everything was okay. And if you look at the trajectory of the country from 1980 forward, things got increasingly better for the wealthy. In fact, something like, I think the number is $50 trillion of wealth got taken from the lower and middle income people and moved to the top 1% under trickle-down economics, which Reagan invented. And middle class and lower income Americans really suffered and continue to suffer right to today, where we have this billionaire class that controls more wealth than the bottom 90% of Americans. So, basically, Carter was a more honest man and a less skillful politician. That's the critique nowadays. So that was a kind of a ramble there, I know. But I really recommend to anybody listening in, if you've never heard this speech or you've never read it, and especially if you weren't born yet when he made it, I recommend you go back and read it, because a lot of what's in it, a lot of the things he says, and a lot of the advice that the citizens he spoke with and quoted had to say are still relevant today. So if we had listened to him and acted as a nation for our own good, who knows how things might be today in terms of income and wealth equality. Actually, and I don't mean that everybody has exactly equal wealth. That's never going to happen and shouldn't happen. But there wouldn't be people with billions and billions of dollars and other people who can't afford healthcare and food. So it's about equity and fairness, not actual equality. So that's my comment on the crisis of confidence speech, which by all measures was a political mistake and an honest assessment.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I love having the show with you. I learned so much. I never heard the speech. And now that you shared it with me, I'm definitely going to go back and look at it more, crisis of confidence, and look through it, because I saw some things that jumped out at me, and just the ones you pointed out, that definitely piqued my interest. But like I said, I just the more we discuss this, the more it just becomes so obvious to me. It's like driving down alone. It's like driving down on a long trip, and you get off on the wrong road, and you're guessing if you're on the wrong road or not, and you keep driving. You're looking at things to try to find something familiar, and it just gets more and more unfamiliar, and the more you drive, the more strange it looks. And that's how I feel right now. And we talk about Jimmy Carter, and looking at our situation as how society is, and how, again, I'm amazed at how we lift up people like, again, I'm just using these people names as references, but journalists who are sports commentators. They get paid, multi millions of dollars to give their wrongful opinion, about weeks back when Jimmy the Greek was doing it. He was right about certain things. He made the comment he made, but yet still, his fame was the fact he was guessing right, and that was the reason he was given a platform. These guys never get it right, but yet still, these are the people who dominate our either internet or TV stations, and that's what you've been fed with, is folks who don't exhibit any kind of honor, any kind of core principles, or any kind of humanity, emotional intelligence at all. They exhibit narcissism, being narcissistic, I should say, exhibit their own selfish interests. They contribute to the, I'm just going to post something to get your attention, whether it's true or not. I'm going to say things that's only to be used as clickbait or attention grabbing, because I want to get your attention from what you're doing right now. And I want you to watch my video. I want you to listen to me, even though I don't have anything valuable to you at all to say. I was having a conversation, just on a side note. I'm going to bring it back to Jimmy Carter again. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine yesterday. We were talking about YouTube, and I made a statement to him. I said, YouTube is one of the best tools ever created. Then I also immediately, once I said it, I thought about it, said it could also be one of the worst tools ever created. You know, and it depends on if you got a plan and a purpose and a coach is where I'm getting to, someone to guide you. Like, if you don't have a purpose, for YouTube, it's going to be like walking around with with a gun pointing at your dome, and with your hand on the trigger. It's like you don't know what you're doing, and eventually you are going to pull that trigger, because YouTube can literally take you away from anything that's productive or positive for you, and just have you consuming content. And he brought up the fact that consumer doesn't just mean buying something. We're consuming information constantly as well. So I'm saying all that to say, as we consume this information, how we're not consuming information that feeds our soul. Like reading about Jimmy Carter is information that will feed your soul, it will feed your spirit. Someone that can be lifted up and say, this young kid is who you should ascertain to be. This is a role model. This is what being presidential meant. Now, you don't have to agree with all his policy decisions he made, but look at him as a as a human being. When he do things in office, it was anti-progressive, anti-love, anti-U.S., as far as that's concerned. And we lift up, I always hear people lift up, who are Republicans, lift up Reagan, as that was one of the greatest errors to them, for Republicans. And it's like everyone else didn't feel that way. You was a minority, you definitely didn't feel he was one of the greatest presidents ever. And what always bothered me about the Democrats is that when I really started paying attention to the conventions, I think right around the time that maybe Kerry ran for office, and how they would not have Jimmy Carter come and speak at any convention. They would have all the other living Democratic presidents come and speak. And then you saw it consistently after that. If you never saw Jimmy Carter come and speak at the convention, they never gave him his flowers as a party to lift him up to say, well, here's our role model. Here's someone we believe showed humanity, was a great American, and stood for the values that he believed our party stands for. I don't think I've ever seen it in my life. I mean, as far as me paying attention to the Democratic Party. Now, maybe it happened a lot earlier, prior to, 87, 88. But I don't remember him speaking at the Democratic Convention when Clinton was in office. Now, maybe I've been mistaken, he did. But I just wanted to point out those things. And I see us going more and more away from that. That's the alarming part. It's like, we know that we're on a rolling road, and we're like, but this road just seems like it's fun. There's a sign that I'm looking at when I drive down, the overhead signs say fun, exciting down the road, free will down the road. That's the signs I see as I drive down. And I know that they're not true. It's not fun. Fun at 5 miles. Honestly, in 10 miles. When I hit those mile markers, I don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, I love that last piece about seeing the signs and the mile markers. That's a tough one. I don't know, as you say that first, I don't know if he's ever been invited back. To your point, I'm not aware of any conventions that I can remember him there, but I can't say for certain that he never was. But I think that's a fair point to make, because he wasn't embraced. The Democrats saw him as losing the presidency. Many Democrats saw him that way, and then basically it was 2 terms of Reagan, 8 years of Reagan, 1 year of Herbert Walker Bush, and then they got 8 years of Clinton, and then 8 more years of a Bush. So yeah, I think that's pretty much we're about 12 minutes out here, and that's pretty much what I have to share. I mean, there's so much more I could say. I can go back in and quote something from the speech, but just this measure of a human being who, I'm going to go back to what Kamala Harris said, a gifted man. And we can even, make that gender inclusive, a gifted human being who walks with humility, modesty, and grace. But I think it's even more important that it's a man, because it's less likely to find that humility, modesty, and grace in many folks walking around with traditional, conventional, masculine energy. And it's important just to note, too, he was a Southerner. He's from the Confederacy. Like he served in the Navy. He was on a submarine. He has a submarine named after him, a nuclear submarine. But he was a Southern guy. You think back and you think of Carter, Lyndon Johnson. People think of Vietnam, but I'm talking about the Lyndon Johnson who, bullied everybody because John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. bullied him and got the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act passed. And even to a lesser degree, but, Bill Clinton, who was an Arkansas guy and could have done much better with his 8 years for various reasons. But Jimmy Carter was, from Georgia, and Georgia struggles, right now with some good news and some bad news down there, but he was a Georgian. And probably the last important piece is that the Democrats throwing out, in many ways, the dignity of faith and religion, along with the disaster of it. There's lots of good reasons to criticize the Christian right, which is pretty much a conservative movement. But Jimmy Carter was this wonderful example of holding on to a real faith. And he was a Southern Baptist. I mean, that was his community. To hold on, you can have this faith in Scripture and in your belief system and still be progressive. And that's that doesn't register for a lot of otherwise intelligent people. So the Democrats could really continue to learn a lot from that, I believe. So that's my last comment on our 39th president. Good living gives you he lived to be 100. My buddy Lou Carnesecca from St. John's University basketball lived to be 99. So maybe there's something to good living.
Let me add this last piece. I'm going to share this with you. Again, I just look at this as, again, being phenomenal and something to learn from as far as a human being and using strategy effectively. So I looked up a question because I was, listening to what you were saying, and I also wanted to come up with, that brought a question to my mind. We're talking about his humanitarian efforts and him being pretty much left out or being left behind, left out, shunned by the Democratic Party. So I wrote, the question was, how did Jimmy Carter's pro-integration stance affect his political career? And it came out with 6 instances. I just want to share them with everyone real quick. It says, Jimmy Carter's pro-integration stance significantly impacted his political career both positively and negatively. Number 1, early setback. Carter's pro-integration positions likely led him to losing his first bid for governor of Georgia in 1966. Strategic shift. After this loss, Carter became more strategic in his campaigning, using the term human rights instead of black rights to appeal to a broader voter base. So he was talking about black rights in 1966. So in 1970, his gubernatorial campaign, Carter initially disavowed his pro-integration stance to win the election, which angered some supporters secured his victory. So that's what you will see most politicians flip based on what their advisors tell them to do and disregard some of their constituents. But here's where he was different. So now, gubernatorial actions. Once elected, Carter reasserted his progressive views on racial issues, declaring the time for racial discrimination is over in his inaugural address. Then his presidential campaign, Carter's civil rights stance helped him win 95% of the Southern black vote in 1976 presidential election. And I bet you if you really studied after that, that's when blacks really were more at 95, 96% Democrat voting because of what Carter did. And I think Clinton and Obama just kind of benefited from that as most blacks putting their base there. So I just liked how, even though he had to shift strategically, and change his stance to get elected, he never lost sight of what his well intentions of advancing racial equity. And that to me is, again, hats off to him. Great man. It's been a great discussion. I'm gonna look forward to, and I thank you for, again, choosing this topic, because now I have something I'm going to continue to share with my network as far as why we need to uplift and honor Jimmy Carter. And he definitely is going to get honor and mention on my wall of what I consider to be my heroes, my ancestral spirits of people who I looked up to and admire. And when I'm really feeling stressed and confused and depressed about where life is and where the country is headed, I tend to study my ancestral spirits, their actions, their behaviors, their writings, and kind of get me centered and back on the true north of being grateful and having a grateful spirit. So I'm going to be utilizing Jimmy Carter's life as a way that always helps keep me on that 10. Those times where I feel it's being tested for my own mental and spiritual capabilities.
Yeah, beautiful. So, yeah, I mean, usually I'll just jump in here. We give a suggestion, of what might be worthwhile for listeners or viewers to do moving forward. And because of the nature of today's podcast, I would just strongly recommend that you listen to or read I'm pretty sure it's July 15th, 1979, Crisis of Confidence speech. And from a more contemporary standpoint, find the video of the probably 6 or 7 eulogies from the service yesterday at the Capitol. The last one was Kamala Harris. I think the first one was Hakeem Jeffries. But listen to what they all say, because you'll hear both Democrats and Republicans speak about this Democratic president. And part of it, I have to admit, part of it for me was listening to Mike Johnson speak about Jimmy Carter was, I had kind of the choke reflex. But he did a good job. He mainly spoke about his faith, because that's where Johnson could compliment a Democrat, I guess. But it's worth, I think it was very moving for me to listen to the eulogies yesterday.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Well, so thank you for those tips. And it's been a while since you and I've done a show. Again, I miss hearing those suggestions, because again, I can't speak for everyone else who listens to the show, but I know I definitely move forth and apply those. So as we shift to our last portion of our show, where we lift up someone who we believe is an example of a fully human, whether they're past or present. And I know for me, I'm sure you probably go the same route. Our topic today is Jimmy Carter, so I'm going to share my 7 reasons why I feel that he exhibits the qualities of fully human outside the ones we've already discussed. So, number one, you mentioned Nobel Peace Prize recipient. He won that back in 2002, with decades of efforts in human rights and promoting economic and social development. His humanitarian work the Carter Center. He secured the release of political prisoners, monitored elections globally, and nearly eradicated worm disease. Civil rights advocate as a Georgia governor, as I talked about before. He declared the time for racial discrimination is over and increased black appointees in state government. Diverse his appointments as President Carter appointed more women and people of color to federal positions, judgeships, than any previous administration combined. Then all previous, you mentioned that, education champion. He established the Department of Education, international peacekeeper, and then is an affordable housing advocate. Again, the great work he did with Habitat for Humanity, which I knew him more for because, I was, 1 and 2 during his administration. So I didn't get a chance to really experience much of that, but I definitely saw his lifelong work working with Habitat for Humanity. And then, of course, being in real estate myself, I began to really learn firsthand the great work that he was doing and his impact he was having with the partnership. But those are my 7 reasons, and I wanted to lift them up as being fully human.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with a double fully human honoring here. So, I'm not going to recite all of the Jimmy Carter things again. I mean, we've spoken to that for the past hour. You just did a great, really clear summary of that. But I'm going to add someone who I've mentioned before, and I was really deeply moved by this person's work in the past week. And I mentioned her at the top of the hour. I'm going to mention Kamala Harris. The dignity and grace with which she oversaw the certification of the 2024 election, which took place on Monday, with all the senators and the representatives present. She's basically certifying the election she lost. She had to say the numbers out loud. She had to say her own name and how many electoral votes out loud. Mm. And then the process of swearing in. I mean, she as the vice president, she swears in all of the senators and representatives who are either elected for the first time or reelected. So it's everybody from, she had a little bit of fun with Bernie Sanders. So she said to him, please stand over here. And I know you don't usually like to go or stand where people tell you to stand and do what you're told. And so they had a really nice laugh, and you could see that there was a great deal of affection and respect there. But she also had to swear in Ted Cruz and any number of other Republican and senators and or representatives, some of whom were election deniers in 2021 and voted to not certify the election in 2021. And then she even had to deal with a couple of the family members of people being sworn in. And the one guy I previously mentioned, where as he was coming forward with his wife, this is the husband of one of the new Republican people in Congress, he was hesitant to go stand next to her. And she actually said, "It's okay, I don't bite," she said to him. And then he wouldn't shake her hand at the end, and she just stepped aside and let him pass. And she just, she was swearing these people in one at a time over and over again. And you would have thought she had won the election. I mean, she did it with this grace and dignity and presence, which is what I want from people I vote for. It was just this beautiful, grounded, present human being who understood her own oath and honored it. And so I just wanted to call out again Kamala Harris for, as she spoke about Jimmy Carter, she walked with humility, modesty, and grace these past 2.5 days doing her job.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, again, Reggie, thank you again for, being present, being here, choosing such a great topic. It was a wonderful conversation. Like I said, I know personally for me, I learned a lot from these discussions. Learn a lot about, preparing for our discussion, learn a lot about Jimmy Carter, his impact in the world. Like I said, now my admiration for him has grown so much that he's definitely going to be, and he's the only president ever get into my ancestral circle of spiritual circle of folks who I admire who have passed. I've learned from their lives. So definitely thank you for that. Thank you, listening audience, for listening to another episode of the Human Connections podcast. We know that we've been off the last 3 weeks. It's great to be back, and hope you all enjoyed our show. And as Reggie said, I want to add to next steps, which is please go out and study and research, as you said, about Jimmy Carter. I mean, I think it's something that will shock you about what you will learn, what you didn't know that does not get discussed. And then hopefully maybe it will help you see why it is something you should aspire to be fully human, and it's like to be that example. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's all work to be more fully human.